And thank you for having me, Kayla, Zach, as well as our guest here, Kaylong, too. As I said, I'm going to try to make this quick because I know people are so busy with their lives lately, and hopefully you all are doing well. Before I actually get started, and maybe while we wait, if anybody else comes in, for you all participating right now, I would like for you to actually just grab a sheet of paper or anything to write on with you. And I'd like for you to think about the last 24 hours. So between 2 o'clock now and 2 o'clock yesterday, hopefully it was sort of a typical day, even though lives haven't been very typical lately. And I just want you to answer these like 20 items. The first 10 items in blue are your positive emotions that you could have experienced in the last 24 hours. So amused, fun loving, being hopeful, feeling loved, feeling proud and confident. So I want you to answer the 10 questions and score them from 0, not at all experienced, all the way to 4, extremely experienced. And again, only look into the last 24 hours, okay? And so I'll give you a couple of minutes to go through the quiz first. And once we get through the first 10, I'll move down to the next 10. If you have any questions while you do this, you let me know. How are you doing there, Kayla? Are you done with the 10?
Yep, I'm done.
Okay, I'm only referring to you because you're the only face I see. So you're my feedback right there. Thank you for staying on video. And then I'd like you to do the same scoring system for numbers 11 through 20. So the items in red are the negative emotions that you could have experienced in the last 24 hours. Again, score them from 0 to 4, 0 meaning not at all experienced, all the way to 4 where you extremely experienced them. All right, so I think I'm getting a visual signal, Kayla, that you're done with up to 20.
Yep.
I'm guessing everybody else is done. And it doesn't have to be perfect. I just want you to be familiar with this because this is something I'd like for you to do actually every day for at least 2 weeks. And I'll explain later why that is. So real quick, we just have to do a couple of calculations to get your final score. So as you can see here for numbers 1 through 10, I want you to count how many from 1 through 10 you rated as 2 or higher. So just count how many you have in items 1 through 10 that you rated as 2 or higher, okay? So just write that number somewhere on the side. And then for numbers 11 through 20, like with the instructions here, I want you to then count how many from numbers 11 through 20, how many did you rate as 1 or higher? Okay, so a little different. For the 1 through 10, count 2 or higher. 11 through 20, count 1 or higher, okay? So put that number on the side. And essentially, all you have to do now, our final step, is I want you to then divide your positive count divided by the negative count. So you can use your phone calculator, your computer calculator, your brain calculator. And you're gonna come up with what we call your positivity ratio. And that normally ranges from 0 to 10, but rarely do we get anybody that close to 10. Okay. So Kayla, you want to volunteer what number you have?
Sure, I was 1.0.
1.0? 1.3?
1.8. Sorry.
Okay, thank you for sharing. And so you might imagine, everybody in the room, that we might be feeling a little bit more of these lately because times have been tough with the COVID pandemic. And so the last couple of weeks and maybe a couple of months is particularly high for many people in terms of negative emotions like fear, anxiety, stress, uh, what else? Depression, sadness, upset, anger, as opposed to these kinds of things. Okay. So thank you for joining me on that. Let me get started on the PowerPoint. I'll explain to you what your scores mean later on once we get through the slides. Okay. Well, don't print. I want you to a slideshow. And let me reverse this again. And if you have any questions along the way, please feel free to just chime in or uh, or write something down on the chat box. All right. So very quickly, I guess I should have done this in the beginning. Thank you again for inviting me. I'm Dr. Christian Gloria, Department Chair and Associate Professor of Public Health here at HPU. I've been here at HPU for about 8 years now. Before this, I studied in Texas at the University of Texas at Austin, where I earned my bachelor's degree in kinesiology, master's degree in health ed, and my PhD in health behavior and health education. For my PhD, I focused on positivity research, essentially the effect of emotional experiences on our overall health and well-being, both physical health and psychological health. For the longest time, we thought that experiences of emotions are just things that come and go. That maybe you experienced something that upset you, that made you angry, that made you sad, that made you feel depressed or anxious. For a while, we thought that those are the things that just come and go. You'll feel them, and then they'll just go away without any kind of long-lasting impact. But through our research and other researchers over particularly the last 20 years, we're learning more and more that experiencing emotions, just the act of experiencing positive emotions or negative emotions, have short and long-lasting impact that both influence our psychological as well as our physical health. So when you experience a lot of negative emotions, like on those items 11 through 20, you're going to be more susceptible to developing mental health disorders like anxiety and depression disorders, which can then also contribute to other physical health problems like heart disease, diabetes, obesity, and other things. Okay. So for my PhD, for my PhD schooling all the way up to now, so that's almost 10 years, I've been studying stress, emotions, and resilience and how they all intertwine with each other. Particularly, I'm interested in studying stressed out populations. Like in my little slideshow there, it kind of shows like a grandma and a child who are seemingly in a war zone. And that's the kind of conditions that I see in developing countries all the time. And it feels like we're in a war zone now, right? Like we're all shelter in place. You can't go out and meet people. And, you know, we are in such a confined quarantine lockdown condition that it's highly stressful. And what happens is all the time we're at home, and all we can do is watch TV or be online on our social media, and all we see are all of these negative and very upsetting, anxiety-inducing types of news throughout the day, every day. So it could lead to what we would consider as chronic stress, because you're experiencing stress nonstop for long periods of time that we know can lead to a lot of health problems, both physical and psychological. So my research is actually more on the positive side of psychology. There's the traditional psychology, which mainly looks at the risk factors, the things that can make you sick, psychologically and physically. But for me, I actually focus mainly on what we call positive psychology, and that's where we study stressed out populations or communities that are in constant distress. We know that there are certain people in those kinds of conditions, even though they're living in very difficult situations, somehow they still manage to survive it, get through it, and maybe even flourish and become resilient outside of those experiences. And so what we do is study them and like, what is it about you that makes you so special that you can deal with a lot of stress and actually grow from that experience? And so we try to identify those magical factors that hopefully we can easily pull from them and create some sort of intervention program so we can apply it to other people so that they can be as resilient in distressful situations like we're living in now. So you might imagine yourself or friends, family members going through this pandemic, going through all of this panic and fear. Some people are sort of crushed by all of the stresses and are very anxious, very fearful, uncertain about the future. There are other people who might be neutral about it, and there might be other people who sort of grow from that experience. And so on my side, I really look for how can we get people to flourish despite difficult circumstances, okay? So very quickly, I mentioned traditional psych and positive psychology. So I'm mainly on the positive psychology side. Let me see if I could turn on my pointer. So these gentlemen right here are Martin Seligman and Dr. Csikszentmihalyi. Took me a while to learn how to pronounce his name. They are really considered to be the founding fathers of positive psychology. And it started in about the mid-1990s, where they really moved away from studying things that make people sick, but studying people who, what makes them nurture their genius and what makes them nurture their talent and what makes life a lot more fulfilling as opposed to just the absence of stress and disease, okay? And I think a lot of people are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy, especially when I go to developing countries and looked at communities where they have nothing. I'm thinking about households right now in lockdown in the Philippines where they have no food, no water, no money. And so they're really struggling with both their physical and psychological health. And I always tell like I was just on a call with the World Health Organization a couple of nights ago, and I told them, you know what? I understand that people are stressed out. I understand that there's risk for anxiety and depression. But before we can even consider mental health, we need to make sure that people are meeting their most basic needs, like that they have food, air, water, shelter, that they have a sense of security. Because if they don't have these things, then it's going to be really impossible for us to even talk about mental health. Does that make sense? Okay. And according to Martin Seligman and Csikszentmihalyi, a happy life is really a combination of three main things. It's a pleasant life, which is the majority of what we're talking about today, an engaged life, and a meaningful life. And a pleasant life, according to Barbara Fredrickson right here, who's developed the broaden and build theory of positive emotions. She was actually sort of my foundation for my dissertation as a PhD student when I did this research or began to do this research. The pleasant life, according to her, is really about maximizing your experiences of positive emotions and minimizing pain and negative emotions. You want the positive to basically overpower the negative so that that could then lead you to a happy and healthy life, okay? An engaged life is somebody who's actively involved with whatever it is that they want to do, that you have control over your life. And if you feel like there's something that needs to be changed, you go out there and change it or make things happen, as opposed to somebody who just sort of sits and waits for the world to change around them. And then the third thing is a meaningful life, meaning that you're just driven by a good and strong sense of purpose, that you know who you are and where you want to be, and that you have built yourself a pathway to get from point A to point Z, reaching your goals and ambitions, okay? And so for the rest of these slides, I'm really going to mainly focus on the positive and negative emotions, and that's the instrument that you just filled out earlier in the beginning of this session, okay? So very quickly, when you experience negative emotions, like on the items you saw on items 11 through 20 earlier today, when you experience things like anger, shame, contempt, disgust, fear, anxiety, depression, what do you feel and how does your body react to it? And I know everybody's on mute, so I'll just try to answer the question for you. Normally, you might feel like an increased blood pressure, increased heart rate. Your breathing might get faster. Your muscles are becoming tense or becoming achy. You might be a little shaky. And everything else becomes a blur because your mind, when you are on fight or flight response, your mind is really just wanting to focus on you and whatever it is that's threatening you. It's an evolutionary response. So if somebody's out there trying to kill us or eat us like a lion or a bear, uh, it's very important for us to be really focused on that stimulating threat, because all we want to do at that moment is either fight or run away. Okay. So if we're strong enough and if we're able to defeat that foe, then great, you can go ahead and fight it. But in many cases, especially in humanity nowadays, you can't just, fight people. And in many cases, you also can't run away from your problems or anything that's threatening you. So that's actually one of the biggest risk factors for our situation nowadays, being on lockdown, being fearful of the pandemic. There's a huge loss, a huge sense of lost control, right? You can't do anything that you want. You have to stay at home. And if you even want to go out there and buy food or toilet paper, it's never there. So people are obviously unable to fight, because you can't fight the COVID, this invisible foe that we have now that's taking over the world, unfortunately. And we also can't run away from it. The best we can do is just stay at home. And even staying at home doesn't feel very safe for a lot of people. So what ends up happening is we are on fight or flight response all day long, each and every day, for I guess at least 2 weeks now. In other countries are at least a couple of months. And so we're going through this fight or flight response nonstop. In short terms, the fight or flight response is good because it makes you a little stronger, it makes you a little faster, it makes you decide in terms of decision making, makes you decide very quickly, because it allows us to survive short-term acute types of enemies, okay? But when it's something that you experience all the time, like being locked down in this pandemic, you end up just going through this fight or flight response all day, every day, as I wrote here. And you end up becoming what we call on stress overload. So when you are in fight or flight response, as I said, you become a superhuman version of yourself temporarily. You become a little faster, a little stronger, a little smarter, okay? But if you're on that all the time, your energy to maintain that will crash. And once it crashes, that's when your immune system will become weakened, and that's when you become more vulnerable to any kinds of health problems, both psychologically and physically. And we know that if you're on stress overload all the time, it can cut back as much as 10 years of your life expectancy, okay? And while we're all on lockdown and have plenty of time to watch TV, I actually strongly recommend, this used to be free on Netflix. I don't think it's on Netflix anymore, but you can easily find it online. It's just a 1-hour video from a very famous stress researcher named Robert Zapolsky. And he studied stress and how it affects our well-being. Again, for the longest time, we thought that stress is just something that comes and goes, that might, make you a little sad, make you a little depressed. But through his research and other researchers after him, we're finding out that it can lead to a lot of health problems, uh, both psychologically and physically. For example, like heart disease and cancer and obesity and diabetes, that can obviously kill people. Okay, so I recommend that you watch that. So now when we feel positive emotions like joy, gratitude, serenity, interest, hope, and love, how do you feel and think? And so very quickly, essentially, you end up feeling the opposite of the fight or flight response, where instead of having a very narrowed focus between you and the threat, now your whole mind opens up, where you can see the whole world much more clearly. And that's why when you are dealing with a problem that stresses you, it's normally best practice to walk away from the problem first, let yourself cool down, find yourself in some sort of positive emotional state like these. Because what happens is when you're on a positive mood or positive emotional state, again, your mind will broaden. You'll see the world much more clearly. And what happens is you also see all of the other options that you have to tackle your problem. You end up becoming a wiser and smarter problem solver. Okay. On the other hand, if you try to solve problems while you're upset, again, at that moment, you are on fight or flight response. And so all you want to do is either fight that person or run away from them. And being humans, we are too proud. We don't like running. And so we end up with the only other choice, and that's fighting. And that's obviously not going to solve any of our problems, okay? So you'll feel these kinds of broadening effect in terms of cognition. You'll also feel much more relaxed. You'll feel much more open to new activities, to new experiences. You're more likely to get online or go outside and chat with your friends if we're not on lockdown. And so you end up taking on new adventures. You end up building on those kinds of resources like I showed here on the slide, where you're more likely to go outside and play with some friends and meet new people and strengthen current relationships. You're more likely to try on new adventures, try on new hobbies. You're more likely to do a lot of different things, novel experiences that actually force us to grow. It's going to make you smarter. It's going to make you more resilient. It's going to make you more socially strong. And these are the kinds of resources, according to Barbara Fredrickson, that create this building effect. So it makes you stronger, not only at that moment, but also in the long term. So in the future, if you ever feel any kind of stress, you can go back into these built resources and sort of summon them so you can be stronger and more protected when you have to deal with any kind of negative situations. Does that make sense? Okay, and I'll explain the rest of them later. Okay. So what happens is when you're feeling positive emotions, so it could be just something as silly and small as chatting with your friends on Zoom, or playing a video game, or watching a funny TV show or a movie on Netflix. When you feel any kind of positive emotions, just like on items 1 through 10 on the survey I showed you earlier, you're going to go through a broadening effect, so the world becomes more clear as opposed to very narrowed and focused. You're more likely to try new things, novel experiences, create new relationships, or improve and strengthen current relationships. You're going to build on these personal resources. That's going to make you stronger and more resilient. And when these things happen, you become a healthier, happier person. And when you're a healthier, happier person, it creates a spiraling effect that allows you to feel more positive emotions more easily. Okay, so you get better and better and better, and you become a better version of yourself each and every day. When we feel any kind of positive emotions, we learned through our research that it can actually benefit you in at least 2 ways. One way is what we call the undoing effect. So this right here is the cardiovascular reactivity. Let's just say that's your blood pressure. This is your blood pressure and baseline. And let's say something stressed you out. Maybe you saw something bad on the news, like, oh, there's a spike in cases of COVID. There's more in Hawaii. There's more in your neighborhood. Maybe somebody in your network is sick or had passed away. So suddenly you're stressed out. You're very anxious. You're very afraid. Your blood pressure's gone up. Okay, so you're an elevated stress response. If you follow the black line, over time, we will all recover. Some people will recover more quickly than others, okay? But if you're stressed out about something, you saw something negative on the news, and you can actually force yourself to experience something positive. And for me, it could be something as simple as just eating ice cream, even even though ice creams may not be the healthiest choice, or calling a friend for some emotional support, or watching a funny Netflix show, whatever it is. When you force yourself to feel a positive emotion, or maybe it's even something natural just happens, if you follow the blue line, it allows you to recover more quickly, okay? So it's very simple like that. The other way that experiences of positive emotions can work for our well-being is if you feel positive emotions all the time and frequently, like the building effect on Barbara Fredrickson's theory, instead of going all the way up and experiencing the full-blown effect of stress, because you become a stronger, more resilient person as a result of your positive emotional experiences, it actually makes you stronger and more resistant. So instead of feeling all the way up stress, you're feeling maybe halfway stress, which then obviously will allow you to recover more quickly compared to other people. Okay? Does that make sense? Just nod, Kayla, if it makes sense. All right. And so the quiz that I had you do at the beginning of this session is exactly like this one you're seeing on the slide. Barbara Fredrickson, she wrote a book and she also created a website. And so you can actually do the test online. So all you have to do is go to positivityratio.com. You click the tab, take the test, and then you'll see the 20 items here. Although her 20 items here are mixed up, positive and negative emotions instead of like separated by group. Okay, so just be careful with that. So what you can do, instead of doing it on paper and calculating it yourself, you can just answer the questions here, and then you click calculate, and you're going to come up with a score. And you'll see here, I just randomly put in numbers today, and you'll see that my score is a bit low. My positivity ratio is 0.71. And then she will provide for you a little bit of an interpretation of what that means. Because emotions and emotional experiences are changing all the time, what we recommend actually is for you to do this test every day for at least 2 weeks, so we can get a better average of how you are generally. Because this past 24 hours might be very uniquely different than your normal day. Does that make sense? And the great thing about this website is once you do the test, you can actually create your own account. And so it saves your data for you and your scores. So you don't have to like memorize it or save it on a piece of paper. So you can track your score and how you're doing over time and be able to sort of have a little bit more control on knowing where you're standing emotionally and how you can improve it later on. Okay. So let's talk about your test results. So I think, Kayla, you mentioned you're like at 1.7 or something around there. Okay, so according to Barbara Fredrickson in our research and other researchers out there, for people to be considered flourishing, these are the people who are happy, healthy, doing really well in life, and are achieving their goals, and are feeling really fulfilled. You have to have a score that's at least 3.0 or higher. Okay, so that's the life goal. If you want to be happy, healthy, and successful and doing well between now and forever, you want to maintain an average score of at least 3.0. So her 3-to-1 ratio right here on the slide, meaning that the positive emotions 3 is outnumbering the negative emotions 3-to-1. Okay. Unfortunately, negative emotions are so powerful that you need at least 3 positive emotions to overpower them to maintain well-being. So if you scored 3.0 or higher, Barbara will consider you as flourishing. You're doing really well, keep it up. If your score is between 1 and 2.9, we will label you as languishing. And 80% of the population are considered to be languishing. These are the people who are maybe feeling as if they're plateauing in life, or maybe life is going down a little bit. You feel like you are yearning for more. You feel like life could be a lot better. You think that the grass is greener on the other side. So there's just things that you want and that you need to feel fulfilled and to feel happy and to feel alive. Okay, so 80% of Americans are like that. So if you're in that area, don't feel like you're all alone, because most of us are there. And especially now with this pandemic, a whole lot more of us are probably there right now, because obviously we don't want to be on lockdown forever. It's not the greatest place to be. If your score then is below 1.0, that means that you're at risk of developing depression. So if your score is less than 1.0, essentially what that means is that the negative emotions that you feel, at least within this past day or regularly, it means that the negativity is overpowering the positivity. So if the negative emotions that you're experiencing is overpowering the positive emotions, then over time you are going to be at risk of developing anxiety, depression disorders, among other things. Okay, so you don't want to be at the lower end of that scale. You want to aim for at least 3.0. The other thing that Barbara did was, aside from individuals, so we know your goal is 3.0 or higher, what about organizations, or what about marriages or families? And so what we found out was that with organizations and teams, you want your team to average also a 3.0 or higher to maintain that happiness, healthiness, and healthy work dynamic. Interestingly, for married couples, and so Barbara studied a bunch of long-term married happy couples, and she found out that the cutoff score, do you think it's higher or lower? Kayla, up or down? Higher, yeah. And so according to our research, you have a married couple for a long-lasting happy marriage that lasts like 50, 60 years till death do them apart. They actually want to have an average positivity ratio of at least 5.0 or higher. So a lot of people are like, what? 5.0, that seems a bit too high. And maybe that's why, divorce rates in America are really high. It's like 55% divorce rate. But the good news out of that 5.0 for happy, healthy married couples is that if you marry the right person, if you're partnered with the right person, feeling positive emotions should be easy because they're going to be there to support you. They're going to be there to make you laugh and make you feel good things and make you go out on adventures. And so the secret obviously is just to find somebody who's right for you. Okay. And I know with this pandemic and the lockdown, it's testing a lot of marriages and families because you just can't get away from each other. So that's something to certainly keep in mind. There is such a thing as somebody scoring a score of 10, but that's really rare. And if anything, we find that that might not even be a good thing to have a perfect positivity score, because that means they somehow have completely shut out any negative emotions in their lives. And we're learning that negative emotions are important. They're a natural part of life. It helps us feel grounded. It helps us see what the world is for what it is. So it's important to feel negative emotions and not to run away from it. Okay? And I explain these things right here. And so very quickly, I just want to summarize a main point of my research finding is that when people feel positive emotions, they normally will go through different kinds of coping strategies. There's adaptive and maladaptive coping. Adaptive coping strategies are the good, healthy kinds of coping strategies, like actually dealing with the problem right then and there, having a good plan, getting people to help you solve your problems. On the other hand, maladaptive coping strategies are the unhealthy coping strategies, like taking drugs or drinking alcohol or fighting with people or taking it out on others. And so what we're finding out from our research is for people who score higher on positivity, especially 3.0 or higher, you end up obviously becoming wiser and smarter because you got a broadening effect on your cognition. You end up doing more of these naturally. It's not even conscious. You're naturally more likely to do the healthy kind of coping, which allows you to be a more resilient person. And a resilient person is somebody who bounces back from problems very easily, very quickly, as opposed to somebody who's sort of crushed by it for a long period of time. So when you're more resilient, regardless of experiences of stress that we can never escape, everybody will experience stress one way or another. When you're a more resilient person, you'll still experience stress, but you're going to be protected and you're not going to be at risk of developing anxiety or depression disorders. Okay. So when you feel positive emotions, you're smarter and wiser. You do healthy coping strategies. You become more resilient, and that resilience protects you from stress. And so you are not going to be as likely to develop mental health problems or physical health problems. And interestingly, when you're in the flourishing group, you'll see the green bars. They have lower stress, lower anxiety, lower depression symptoms. When you compare them to the languishing or depressed groups, they're higher stress, higher anxiety, higher depression. But even though you see these clear, big differences between the groups, they're technically all experiencing the same thing. They're all experiencing the same amount of stress. But when you're a flourishing person, you're protected. And so you don't value them as powerful as other people. So people who are languishing or depressed, they see the world in a more sort of like browner kind of lens, a more negative kind of lens. So they end up magnifying and making the problems seemingly bigger than they really are. Okay. So that was sort of me flying through it. And I guess the main thing out of today is, again, your goal is to have at least 3.0 or higher in terms of your positivity score. Okay. And so I wanted to go back on, let's see here, on this PowerPoint, or not PowerPoint, on the PDF file. So you'll again see the different kinds of positive emotions in blue and the different negative emotions in red. So your goal essentially, especially on lockdowns and pandemics here where we're limited on what we can do, your goal is to maintain a high amount of experiences of positive emotions and then decreasing, however you can, decreasing these kinds of negative emotions, okay? So you can, the more you experience these things, the more likely you're gonna score at least 3.0 or higher. So going back again to this question, let me switch back again. So many button presses. I'm almost done here. So the question is, how can you increase your positivity and negativity? Okay, and it's very different with each person because each person have very different sets of what things make you feel good and what things make you feel bad. So especially on lockdowns like this, where we're just at home all day long, every day, you probably have a pretty good routine now on what are the things that happened to me throughout the last 24 hours that are making me feel negative emotions? What are the things that are making me feel positive emotions? And so for me, the things that are making me feel negative emotions are maybe when I'm too connected to social media or the news, where I'm seeing nothing but bad news all day long. So I'm feeling really upset, feeling really anxious, fearful. And so maybe a plan that I could do is minimize my time on those kinds of media channels. It doesn't necessarily mean that reduce your device time or screen time. It just means that maybe you should just reroute from the negative news and look for more positive outlets, like go watch Netflix that makes you laugh. Something that I like to do, and maybe because I'm old, a good source of positivity for me out of TV is just watching Seinfeld. Seinfeld always makes me laugh and feel happy. Or maybe eating ice cream, or maybe just zooming with your friends and family, spending more time on the things that make you feel good and feel positive so that you can maintain those positive emotional experiences and minimize the negative ones. Does that make sense? Okay. And so the other things you can do, according to Barbara Fredrickson, are of obvious, oh, too fast, disputing negative thinking, try not to focus so much on on the negative things. And so a lot of people like right now focus so much on the increasing rates of people who are testing positive. But then I'm seeing some people who focus more on how many are recovering, how many are doing okay, and focusing most on those numbers aside from the negative increasing rates of infection. Break the grip of rumination. Don't marinate too much on the negative things. Try to focus your time and energy and attention on the things that make you feel better. Okay. And as I said, a social media diet. Avoid. I mean, I'm not saying that you should completely shut out the news. It's important to be informed, to be prepared, but also don't spend so much time on it. Okay. And try to, and I know even with our isolation and quarantine, it's hard to be surrounded by people who make us feel good. But just because we're physically away from others that we love, it doesn't mean that we can't Zoom with them or FaceTime or email or get on the phone, and try to focus on spending again those time with those good people that make you feel good. And if you look at the numerator and the denominator, positivity, negativity, again, the focus is to minimize the number of negative emotions that you experience. Increase the positive ones. And again, these are sort of general recommendations that you wouldn't expect people to say during a pandemic. This is out of Frederickson's book. But again, you know, being stuck at home all day long for weeks and maybe even months, just try to build in your daily schedule moments of joy, of love and gratitude and feel good. Sometimes those are natural that your other friends and family, loved ones will bring upon in your life, but you also have a lot of control over it. Okay, sometimes I'm just stressed with reading emails all the time or watching the news. I'm like, you know, I know that they're important right now, but I need to de-stress. I need to just let them go. I'm going to go watch an episode of Seinfeld or an episode of Tiger King. So just something to just make you feel good. You don't want to be marinating in negativity all day long because it doesn't help you. It doesn't help the people around you. So try to build more. And sometimes I have to tell people you have to build it in your schedule. So you have to force yourself to put yourself in a space that's going to make you feel positive emotions. Again, the key is for you to feel the emotions as opposed to just sort of counting them. Okay. Okay. So lastly, again, just be aware of your environment. And normally for me in a typical non-pandemic day, I would have people imagine their environment at home, their environment at work, their environment in other places where they hang out with other people, where they spend time. So you can, and we do as individuals, we do have a lot of control about what experiences we have day in and day out in different kinds of environmental settings. And for a lot of people, they don't think that it's within their control. And I'm like, yes, it is. If there's somebody at work or in school that upsets you, you don't like seeing, you can avoid them. And if you can't avoid them, you can just try to set yourself up that you're not so affected by them. Okay. And so nowadays we're stuck at home. And maybe in some ways that's good or bad because then you have a lot of control about what happens in your home. But again, you know, with the context of the pandemic and the fears we have outside of our homes, we also have to really take a lot of control out of our lives to figure out how can we make this otherwise difficult situation something that we can use to rest and grow and develop and learn lessons from it. And I think for a lot of people, and especially students of mine who are feeling so stressed, I mean, I have students now, like the younger freshman students who've lived a life without experiencing any kind of wars or pandemics or terrorism. I think I'd like for the younger generations to rest assured, or even the older ones, that we've been through so much worse. We've been through World War I, World War II. We've been through a nuclear threat. We've been through 9/11. We've been through other pandemics and epidemics. We will be just fine. It's just a matter of just sitting at home and trying to enjoy that moment as much as we can. Okay. So that's really all I have for my little talk today. And what I can do, Kayla, is I can email you the PowerPoint as well as that like little PDF survey. So if you want to email that out to the participants today, you can do that. But I understand you also have this recording, so you can make that available for them.
That would be great. Thank you.
Any questions? I know I went through it really quickly. So I guess before I close this session, I'd like to just remind everybody about the main take-home message, and it's about the numerator and the denominator. Figure out ways on how to increase the positive experiences and decrease the negative experiences, and measure that each and every day. So you'll see where you stand today, you'll see how you look tomorrow, and always try to build more positivity in your day-to-day life so you can always get at least 3.0 or higher as your general average, because that's the key ingredient to living a happy and healthy life. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Gloria.
Thank you, Kayla. So unless you have anything else, that's all I have for you today.
Not unless anyone else has any questions.
Any questions from anybody before we go?
All right.
All right, thank you. Have a great day. Enjoy your lockdown. Stay happy and healthy.
You too.